Welcome to our monthly workshop offered by the Office of Work Life and Elder Care. We are thrilled to have Dr. Rhodus with us today to talk to us about how dementia impacts our five or eight senses. So stay tuned, everyone, and get ready for a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Dr. Rhodus.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I am ready to rock and roll in this presentation. If you all have any questions that don't get answered today, please know my email. I would love to talk to you offline. So a little bit of an outline. I am going to talk about sensory systems and how they relate to dementia care and dementia safety. So I'm going to give you lots of practical tips and tricks as we go through. I will kind of think about this idea of neuroanatomy. What is sensation? It's really beyond just what we hear and see and taste and smell. But how does that really play into how people occupy their time, how they can manage daily care activities and safety? And we'll end with a few local resources. So to get us started, let's think a little bit about neuroanatomy. When we're thinking about neuroanatomy from a neurodevelopmental perspective, so you have this brand new baby that's brand new nervous system into the world, and it's growing and thriving and doing wonderful things. This brain is completely dependent on the outside environment to help it grow and to stabilize and regulate itself. So if you think about a couple of things that you would do if you have kids or if you've been around kids, what is a couple of those first things that you would do for a newborn infant to help it regulate and feel calm? You don't have to unmute, but I'll just pause for a second and let you think of a couple things. Well, we really are going to support this newborn baby and their nervous system through sensation. We wrap that baby up and we give it full body pressure. That's called proprioception. We rock the baby. That's called vestibular input. We sing to the baby. We use lavender infused lotions. We're really taking care of this newborn nervous system through a sensory standpoint. So we're supporting the growth and the development and the behavior of this new life through sensation. Well, we can continue this trajectory through neurodevelopment, and then it almost gets mirrored, where it can be presented in a similar way in neurodegeneration. So once you have cognitive impairment, that's a degenerative cause, and you have Alzheimer's disease or a related dementia type, that brain is and the nervous system starts to die. And some progress rapidly and some progress slower. But it's important for us to recognize that the brain has less and less and less ability to regulate and care for itself. And it becomes increasingly dependent on the environment and the sensations that are offered in that environment to keep it calm and regulated and allow the brain to function and to work. So some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today are this lifespan perspective of neuroanatomy. How can we really help this brain grow well in infancy and childhood? As adults, we can often initiate and do things that help us feel calm and comfortable, like listening to loud music, going for a walk or sitting on a swing or dancing, getting a deep pressure massage. All of those are sensory experiences that regulate our nervous system and help us behave well and adaptable. But when someone has a neurodegenerative condition, things start to change. And we need care supports to really maximize that option or those opportunities. So when we're thinking about sensation, lots of people know the basic five. The basic five are vision or seeing, hearing or auditory, taste is gustation, touch is tactile input, and smell is olfaction. Those are the basic five. But there's three others that I really want you guys to also think about and start to think about how these play a role in your life as well. Proprioceptive input is body position and pressure in the body. In utero, the brain and the nervous system rapidly grow under pressure. They're surrounded by fluid. It's how the brain actually grows the fastest. As an adult or at any age, if you hit your shin and you have pain, you might say a couple choice words, but then the next thing you're going to do is probably bend down and rub the spot that hurts because pressure slows down the pain response. We also can see that pressure helps with attention and feeling calm. You all have maybe seen these weighted blankets. They're all the rage over the last few years at like Walmart and all these different places. The pressure can help decrease some levels of anxiety and help regulate people's nervous system. All of that is proprioceptive input. Vestibular input is another one that we don't typically talk about unless you're having some level of vestibular impairment. So I don't know if anybody's experienced vertigo, but if you've experienced vertigo, then you very much know about vestibular sensation. Vertigo is when you feel very unbalanced and dizzy. Vestibular input is really controlled and maintained in our ears, but it helps us understand where our body is when it's balancing and moving. So if we think about if we start dancing really fast, our body is really trying to balance. That's our vestibular system that's taking care of that. Another sensation that has been known about for a long time, but has only recently been starting to be seen in the literature and the evidence is interoception. Interoception is how we feel on the inside. So I feel hungry, or I need a drink, I'm thirsty, or I really got to go to the bathroom, or this part of my body's hurting and I know exactly where it's at and I know what that means. Interoception is interesting because with advancing neurodegeneration, especially in the Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, the connection between the body awareness of interoception and the meaning of what that is in the brain can start to have a disconnect. So people can have to go to the bathroom and their body is uncomfortable, but they may not recognize that that feeling of discomfort is a key flag or indicator of, I need to go to the bathroom. Or they might be hungry and uncomfortable, but not be directly aware of, like, I'm hungry, I need to eat. Another thing that happens with dementia is that a symptom is loss of initiation. Initiation is the ability to get an activity started. So when we're thinking about this idea of functional cognition or using our brain in a functional daily way of how we occupy our time, we plan something, we then sequence it, and we initiate. So in this process of getting things ready, initiation is key to carrying out an activity or an occupation of how you occupy your time. We see in dementia that people might really want to do something and be engaged, so they'll sit down in an activity or whatever it might be, but they may have this block or this inability to get started. Even if they have all of the skills and the abilities to do that task, they might just not be able to get over that hump to get it started. What we have seen in dementia care is that if we help get someone started by either handing them something or doing hand over hand or just, physically helping them to get started in an activity, once they start, the motor memory can keep going and they can really engage and actually complete the task almost independently, as long as they still have those skills. So I'm thinking about all of this stuff and how it relates to the body and dementia care, but all through the realm of these 8 senses. As we go through these different sensations, I'm going to try my best to give you some practical tips. So if you know of someone that has memory loss, or in the future, if you might be caring for someone with memory loss, I hope that you can take a couple of these tools and put them in your toolbox and give it a try. I will preface by saying that not everything works for everyone, and that the sensory aspect is very unique. And I'll try to give you some different examples of what we've been doing in our clinical research studies as well as clinical care, just to kind of help you put the pieces together. So if we think about vision as our first element of supporting people with dementia through this idea of visual input and sensation, it's important for us to recognize that up to 80% of people, or 80%, let me start that again. It's important for us to recognize as older adults, everyone, even without dementia, can need up to 80% more light just to see what they see every day. So even if your memory and your mind and your cognitive capacity is completely normal, you could still need up to 80% more light. So if we add that level of needing extra light on top of cognitive impairment, we're then also going to see some other changes. Dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and other dementias can really have a change on depth perception. So people can have a hard time recognizing if there is a step or how far the step is, or if there is a depth, like if you're walking out on and it's not a sidewalk, or even if there is a sidewalk and there's a step, you might want to go ahead and physically or verbally tell your loved one, hey, there's a step, and then maybe help them balance a little bit if they need that. But people will need more and more support whenever heights change. Another element is that color awareness fades as well. So we recognize that the colors red and lime green are really helping for attention in this group of people. The color red is a cortical trigger for attention. Even in people with cortical blindness, they can still see some shades of red. It still stands out. It's one of the reasons why our stoplights are red and the stop signs are red. It really makes people pay attention. These two elements are really important to know if you're caring for someone at home or even in a facility. I'll give you an example from my clinical practice. I was working, I won't tell you the facility, but it was a brand new dementia care facility and it was just pristine. And I was referred in as an occupational therapist to a little lady who was about 90 pounds, and she was taking it had to take 5 people to get her into the shower. Five. What I found out was I walked with her into the bathroom and I realized that the walls were just beautiful white and the floor was beautiful white tile and the shower stall was solid white and the shower bench was white, the grab bars were white, the shower head was even white. So this little lady, who I then also found out that she had legal blindness, she was not able to see her environment. She was then also very modest and they were taking off all of her clothes. The bathroom was kind of chilly, so she was getting cold. And then they put her into this shower stall that she couldn't see anything in, and they sprayed her with water. So you could really understand this level of discomfort that she was really experiencing. While they had all great intentions and they were trying to really make a clean environment for the people that lived there, it wasn't supporting what that person with dementia really needed. So for that individual, I called the daughter and I said, can you buy us some red towels? I brought in red duct tape and we put a candy cane around the shower head and the grab bars so that she could actually see what she needed to be holding on to. We put the red towels across the bench and we really helped bring that shower stall more to life so that she could kind of recognize what she was getting into. And that helps decrease the level of care. Another element of vision is figure ground. So if you look at these pictures on the bottom right, if you look at it, any of them, think about what you see first. Like, let's take the middle one, for example. Do you see a tree and some birds? Or do you see lions? So are you looking at the white part or the black part? That's an element of figure and ground. Can we discern what we're looking at from what's behind it and in the background? That really gets impaired with people with dementia. So if you're living in a space, or if you go into like Walmart that's super cluttered, they're going to have increased anxiety and have a harder time. I have some practical tips on this side to kind of give you some help. I believe we can send these slides out so that you'll have all of this as a resource, but I'll just hit a couple before we move on to the next. Think about this idea of needing 80% more light. A lot of times having motion censored lights can help, and those are readily available. You can order them off of Amazon for like 15 bucks. We have one in our closet, so when we walk in, the light just turns on. Having a couple extra of those so that people can really see what they're looking at. It's also important to remove things that people can trip on, especially if it blends in onto the floor, because people are going to have a harder time recognizing and they'll have an increased fall risk. Another thing about this idea of depth perception, black and really dark areas start to look like holes. So it's really important that we're maximizing and utilizing lighter spaces and colors in our spaces on the floor to help people feel more comfortable when they're walking. All
May
right,
I ask a
so
question?
yes, please do.
So, I had learned in another lunch and learn elder care session that like black and white tile on the floor can appear like holes in
Mhm.
the floor, and that can also cause a problem because of depth of perception. What is your take on that?
You're exactly right. It's interesting because we say that we want to have a lot of contrast. We want people to be able to see what they're taking away or what they're using. So having contrast such as like if you have a white tablecloth, maybe use a colored plate. Or if you have a white plate, don't put mashed potatoes and, fettuccine Alfredo that's all white on that plate. People won't be able to see it. But going back to this idea of contrast in the floor, it can cause a lot of distress for people when they're trying to walk. So I would definitely agree that a white and black tiled floor could be really distressing. I had one patient at another facility that I was working with who was refusing to go in the dining room. And I took him for a walk. And after a couple weeks and he was trusting me, we were walking down the hall and he was weaving in and out of the carpet with his walker as he was leading the way. And what he was doing was he was following the lighter colored carpet path and avoiding all the dark areas on the carpet. And then when we went back to the kitchen, I realized they had really dark laminate flooring in the dining room compared to a lighter carpet. So by the time I finally got him to trust me to even just walk into there, he leaned back, he picked up his walker, and he was ready to jump into the floor of the dining room because he thought it was like a pool or a big step down. So I think that these are just examples to really pay attention to this idea of, yes, we need contrast, but be cautious when it's on the floor or on something that you want someone to sit down on, because they won't necessarily be able to recognize if it's a hole or if it's secure and safe and steady. That's a great question. Thank you. All right, we're going to switch over to hearing. So let's think about what we're hearing and processing in our minds. There's newer research that's come out over the last couple of years that's showing that hearing is one of the top ways that we can reduce dementia risk. So if you need hearing aids, you need to be making sure that you're wearing them. If your loved one needs hearing aids, please do all that you can to make sure that they wear them as well. I know it gets challenging because sometimes people like to hide hearing aids and they're really expensive, but there's a direct link between hearing loss and onset and progression of dementia. When we're thinking about making sure that their hearing is well, we then have to think about this idea of cortical hearing or cortical processing at the brain level. So once the information is past the ears, we've made sure that someone can hear and it's inside of our brain. We then have to think about what the brain with dementia is doing with those sounds. It can take up to 90 seconds for someone with dementia to process what they hear. 90 seconds. 90 seconds is a really long time. If we just take for just a second and think about this neurodevelopmental perspective, did you know that auditory processing isn't fully developed until someone is 15 years of age? 15. So it can take a toddler 3 to 4 minutes to process what they hear. It can take someone with dementia 1 to 2 minutes to process what they hear. This idea of hearing something and then having the brain understand it, put meaning to it, and process it, and then turn that into behavior is dramatically altered for people with dementia. You can tell that I obviously talk really fast and I don't take a whole lot of pauses. I hardly breathe when I talk. Even if I'm just sitting next to someone, I get really excited and I talk fast. It has been a very intentional skill that when I'm with someone that has memory loss, I have to take longer and pause. And while I'm pausing, I make sure that my face is still just as animated so that people can stay engaged, so that they can see as their brain is processing and their vision is processing that I'm still a safe place and I'm still engaged in this conversation. So we're trying to match what they're seeing visually to what they're processing, but knowing that they're processing it slower. My dad now has vascular dementia, and I will tell you, even though I know all of this stuff, we went out to the restaurant a year ago and the waitress walked up and was like, "Hey, what would you like to drink?" And I was like, "Diet Coke." And we looked at him and he kind of didn't even he looked up at her and then kept looking at me and looking at the menu. And the lady was like, "What would you like to drink, sir?" I mean, she looked at me and I was like, "Just get him a tea." And she walked away. And as she was walking away, he looked up at her and said, "Coke." And I was like, "Oh, I know this stuff. Like, let's just slow down and let him process this so that he can still stay engaged and complete, these activities that everyone wants to do with what he wants." We had another person in our clinical trial that we're running, and we teach caregivers these techniques. And we had a lady say that she was allowing pauses. She was only asking for one thing at a time. She was opening the blinds in his bedroom 5 minutes before she tried to talk to him. And he was talking to her. He was answering her questions. And she said it was the first time in over a year that they could actually have a conversation. And all that time, she was thinking that he just didn't want to talk to her. And so he was just silent and ignoring her because she thought that he just didn't want to engage with her anymore. But it was just that his brain was processing at a different speed. So when you're caring for someone with dementia, making sure that you recognize these elements, that you're slowing down, allowing pauses, and also thinking about the care tips and some of the safety considerations of people aren't going to be able to hear if the fire alarm's going off. They're not going to be able to really process if a firefighter comes up to them or someone from an ambulance or something like that, or even a doctor who's telling them or asking them questions. They're not going to be able to process at that same speed. So being their advocate and helping fill those gaps. Another part about the auditory processing that I try to always make sure everyone thinks about, this idea of the golden years, it's the ages from 15 to 25. The music and the things that we liked during those years are the things that people are going to like for the rest of their life. That's why we have the golden oldies music, right? If you have someone who was born in the 30s, they're going to like music that's substantially different to someone who's born in the 50s and 60s. So when you're thinking about trying to help someone kind of become more alert, we know that music is really tied to emotion and can really help either pick someone up or kind of taper them back down if you go to slower music. I worked in the VA for a little while, and I was presenting these same topics to a national audience within the VA. And someone mentioned this, I was talking about the connection with emotion and things like that. And someone mentioned, what if you're working with a veteran who was listening to some song or some type of music during this period of 15 to 25 when they're out in combat? And it actually might elicit really traumatic feelings or really strong negative feelings. And they might not be able to verbalize that they're being or that they're feeling uncomfortable, and then they just get agitated and more aggressive. And that was the first time that I really had thought about this idea of trauma-informed care through music. We need to make sure, as much as we possibly can, that whenever we're caring for someone, we're doing so in a really respectful way of what they've experienced throughout their life. So if we're playing music and it's related to what they were listening to during this era, thinking about any other types of trauma that they may have experienced or difficult times, it's going to be really important. And you might want to try to talk to the family member, or if you are the family member, try to avoid some things that you think might be triggering, or at least pay attention to the response to see if you're triggering things that people's behaviors and their attitude might be changing. It's really important. All right, so we talked about vision and hearing. Let's talk about smell and taste. These two I present together because they are linked together. If you cannot smell, then you cannot taste. It's really important to think about taste, especially for people who have cognitive impairment and live by themselves. Taste can kind of have this safety mechanism, because if something is rancid or like soured milk, the first reaction of a bad taste is to not continue to eat it or drink it or whatever it is, even if it's chemicals, right? But if you don't have good taste, we know that dementia can impact your smell. If you don't have good smell, then you don't have good taste. And if you don't have good taste, you might be taking in things that your body is trying to tell you, do not eat this, do not drink this. So it's important, if you're supporting someone who lives by themselves, to put away or lock up the chemicals so they're not accidentally ingested, and to routinely check the expiration dates on things. Another thing about taste is that there are 3 flavors or types of flavors that really can elicit people's dopamine response and will make them crave or want more food. So one of the challenges with dementia, especially in later stages, is people naturally take in less nutrients and less into their body. So sugar, salt, and fat, as long as people don't have diabetes, or you could use a sugar replacement, as long as people don't have severe hypertension and water retention, and fat, as long as people aren't having a substantially high cholesterol. I mean, all 3 of those flavors can really impact your health. So you really want to use them cautiously and talk to your physician before you change anything dramatically. But sprinkling a little salt on a little bit of food that people are just not eating can maybe help them take the next bite. Or putting a little bit of sugar or Splenda into someone's water, or a little lemon flavor, can help them drink a little bit more. So think about how you can kind of use those 3 things without causing any danger or change to someone's nutritional habits, staying in the safe side, to help them take in more food and more water. Let's see. Smell is another one that we think about, of recognizing soured food or spoiled food. And also this idea of just quality of life. If someone's smell is going down, then their taste is going down, and their nutrition is going down. So really doing everything that we can to maximize these 3 things. Oh, I will tell you really quick. There is some studies and evidence in the literature that was using lavender, essential oils lavender, diffused while people slept in nursing homes. So in a dementia care unit, they had essential oils diffused throughout the night. That was lavender, and they compared it to something like safflower oil or something like that. They found that the people that slept with lavender in the air had substantially reduced behavioral and psychiatric symptoms of dementia during the day, like significantly so. So that tells us a couple of things. One, people don't have to perceive the smell to still have that chemical reaction in their brain that can then lead to changed behaviors. People were sleeping, so they weren't aware of the smell. It still changed their behaviors. It also tells us that smell can have a substantially lasting impact on our behavior. People were, exposed to this sensation while they slept at night, and throughout the next day, like 12 hours later, they're still having improved behavior. So this idea of smell, even though someone can't perceive it per se, can still change our behaviors and our reactions. Let's move on to touch. I really like talking about touch because it's important, but it's also important to think about people's preferences, their sensory preferences. We had someone in one of our studies who was having a hard time with showering, refusing to shower. We sent them an assessment that's built into our work that we do. And we found out that this individual had tactile defensiveness. He doesn't like to be touched, especially on his feet. And so the therapist mentioned to his wife, have you ever considered water shoes for the shower? And she laughed and said, oh, we have probably 4 pair in the closet because anytime we'd go to the lake, he'd always put the shoes on his feet. He would never go barefoot. And so the therapist said, well, pull him out and put him by the shower and try to ask him to put those on the next time you want to try to get him in the shower. Just putting those shoes out allowed him to actually put the shoes on himself. He got in the shower, he washed himself, and he got back out. So this little trick of decreasing the input from a touch standpoint on something that's incredibly sensitive was enough to allow him to re-engage in self-care and really take that burden off of his wife. So I don't know if you've ever seen this little guy. He's called a homunculus. And a homunculus is the representation of surface area on your brain from the tactile touch receptors in our body. So as you can see, our hands have greater surface area or mapped on the brain. It's a bigger state per se, if you're thinking about like a map of the United States. Our hands are more like Texas than they are like Rhode Island, right? Our hands, our mouth, our feet, and our genitalia are the 4 areas with the most representation from a surface area standpoint. We know that aging naturally decreases tactile input and that Alzheimer's disease and other dementias also decreases the awareness of touch and that link between the body and the brain. But these 4 areas continue to really stand out and matter a lot. We talked to lots of people who say they become so combative during toileting tasks or bathing tasks. And if we really dig into it and we start to think about the connection of how these areas might be really the only areas that they're perceiving through touch throughout their entire body. And then the care or the type of touch becomes mechanical in nature and that you're just trying to get someone clean and then done. It can be very uncomfortable and really increase the challenges and the disconnect or the burden between caring for someone and being able to get through these tasks of self-care. One of the ways that you can work around some of this is warming up towels and washcloths before you use them, like a baby wipe warmer that they use for babies, because even babies don't like cold baby wipes. You can use that for older adults as well. They make these like $50 towel warmers now. You can throw a towel in there while someone's getting ready for the shower and put that on the bench before they sit down. So they're not sitting down on a cold bench. It's actually warm on their tushy and it feels a little bit more inviting. Also making sure that you are aware of what people are doing with their hands. A lot of people will start to pick at things or just kind of rub things and fidget. If you can think of something that people can use their hands with some kind of meeting, like hand them a washcloth if you're going to do a self-care task, or ask them to help separate forks if you're working in the kitchen, or just helping them use their hands. I think there's some saying, idle hands are the devil's work or something like that. So we want to make sure that the hands are moving and that people are getting good input to their hands. There's one other nuance about touch that I want to just bring up, just as a human, as a person. When we have a baby, our our baby knows the mother based on smell and touch, right? As that baby grows, it learns its environment through putting things in its mouth and touching everything. And I mean everything. I have a 1-year-old right now, and he won't get out of anything. He's in everything. Babies touch everything to learn and the memories and understand the world. When we become adults, we exchange love through touch. We know that we have a spouse who is loving and kind based on how we touch one another. When someone has a neurodegenerative condition like dementia, touch really is reduced in the opportunities of loving companionship or just natural touch of the environment. So if you think about going across the lifespan, it's critical that we're touching people to help them just feel whole. When I worked in dementia care, I often would just go sit, hold someone's hand if I had free time. Or even if I was working with them in a clinical setting and they had goals and stuff, the first 5 minutes would often just be me sitting next to them, holding their hand so that they could actually feel that I am here. I am here to support you, and I see you, and I'm ready to rock and roll as soon as you are. So really think about how you are touching people and what you're using, what touch looks like with their sensory preferences. Another element of sensation is vestibular. So I mentioned earlier that this is all about movement, and our body will naturally change in the way that we understand and process vestibular input. Vestibular awareness goes down with age. So the older someone is, the less balanced they are just naturally. Then you add in these visual components like the lack of or the decreased depth perception and the changes in color awareness and all of these other visual elements that are supposed to help balance out some of our vision, and things become very tricky. So we want to make sure that we're creating environments that have the natural supports in case someone loses their balance. Like the grab bars, you can see in this picture that they're red, right? In the shower stall, they're really easily accessible. There are times that they can be placed in the wrong area, or even if you're introducing a walker to help someone be more balanced when they walk, if you introduce it at a stage of dementia where people really aren't having any new level of learning, they can actually end up tripping on the walker if they forget that they need to use it or how to use it. So it really needs to be introduced at the ideal place where people can still learn new habits and routines and build that into their day. When we're thinking about vestibular movement from a regulation and a behavior standpoint, go back to that baby example. Rocking is calming and regulating to the nervous system. I don't know, you've probably seen some adults who will just kind of sit here and rock back and forth or twist. Movement is very calming to our body. When you go linearly, that's what's regulatory. When you start to move erratically or not straight back and forth or forward and back, that starts to actually become arousing. So when we work in pediatrics and help kids with sensory processing disorder and autism, we can rev up their nervous system by spinning them on a swing. But it can be really dangerous because if we're overstimulating someone with too much vestibular input, the effects of overstimulation with vestibular input can take 4 to 6 hours to wear off. So if you think back to when you were a kid and if you ever sat on like a tire swing or a merry-go-round and you got really, really dizzy, how long did it actually take you to wear off that dizziness feeling? For people with dementia, it can take them for 6 hours. That's a really long time. So if we're thinking about wanting to support people, we don't want to necessarily just ask them to get up and dance if we don't recognize or realize how their body is going to process and help calm that feeling back down. Proprioception is probably my favorite sensation just because it is so incredibly regulating. It's not just pressure to our joints of like putting a weighted lap pad on our lap or getting a good tight hug. All those feel good, but it's also in our mouth and this idea of oral motor input. If you think about the toddler who has a pacifier in their mouth, they're sucking because it's calming. So a lot of times people with dementia will mouth things and put non-food items in their mouth. They're trying to get input and pressure in their mouth. It's one of the reasons why smoking is so habitually addictive. We like that pressure of sucking at things. It's just innate. Um, and so it's hard to not just break the nicotine, but just putting stuff in their mouth. So gum is a good alternative. When you're caring for someone with dementia, if they have proper oral and denture hygiene and teeth, you could give them some gum if you're not worried about choking hazards. You could also try sugar-free candy like mints, or even yogurt through a straw or smoothies through a straw to give them that sensation. You have to be aware of it, but it's just going to naturally brush some endorphins and things that are calmer throughout their brain to help them feel calmer and more regulated. Really big caveats with proprioceptive input is that people with dementia lose this idea of interoception and connection of body awareness. So if they're sitting in a prolonged position with any kind of, they might start to become, they might have less awareness of, or this is thinking about, or that we're continually doing checks at least every 2 hours, they may not be able to independently fix that for themselves. We've also seen this idea that 20 minutes is kind of the ideal onto the body. After 20 minutes, we'll start to turn off the awareness to that pressure. It's called habitual to this sensation, and we won't be paying attention to it. So the therapeutic benefits are kind of lost. Let's talk a little bit about interoception, or these internal feelings. Bathroom, if I'm hot, if I'm cold, how am I going to get comfortable? So we see a lot of wandering and fidgeting and rummaging with people with Alzheimer's disease. And sometimes it's been equated to this idea of needs, that their needs aren't necessarily met, that they might be hungry or thirsty or cold or hot or need to go to the bathroom, but they're just not able to connect this idea of what's uncomfortable in their body to what they actually need. So almost like a Montessori type environment of preparing an environment that's going to cue them for what they need throughout the day. For example, we often encourage people, if someone is seeing this pattern of rummaging in the kitchen or through the closets or whatever at a certain time, go ahead and put out a snack and a drink on the counter where they can just see it. So maybe they think I'm hungry, I'm in this environment, I'm trying to find something to eat. If they go ahead and see their food right there, they will have less anxiety and less need to rummage. Also making sure that people have a bathroom in line of sight so that they don't need to start looking through all the closed doors. You could maybe put signage up, like a restroom sign on the door if the door is closed, things like that to help cue them to where they need to go so that they're not trying to figure it out by themselves. We hear lots of reports of people having, peeing in the corner or in a trash can. They don't want to do that. They're just doing it because they don't know where to go or how to manage their body sensation at that moment. So making sure that we're creating a supportive environment. Another element about this too is to make sure that you're paying to fluid intake during the summer months. We really, from May until August, we see dehydration and UTI kind of skyrocket in this population. And it's because the hotter months will create more of a dehydration environment, and they're just not replenishing themselves enough. So I have covered a whole lot of different sensations, a whole lot of different tips and tricks on safety and care and neuroprocessing and sensory processing. I'm going to open this up for questions. We have about 15 more minutes, but I want to invite you all. We have 9 more spots in this NIH-funded clinical trial that we're doing. We're providing the education that a lot of the different points and tips and techniques that I've provided here today. We're providing it in a tailored or individualized program. You get connected to a dementia care specialist once a week for 8 weeks over telehealth. So you get to schedule it at a time that works for you. Sessions are usually around 30 to 45 minutes. You end up getting like $150 for gift cards for your time. So the QR code is here, but that QR code is just going to send me your name to my email. So if you want to skip the QR code, just give me a call or shoot me an email, and I would love to talk to you more about this program or any of the other programs that we offer at Seniors Brown, I can connect you to those as well. With that, there are a couple of resources additional resources that I want to add that's not just Seniors Brown or the work that we do in my lab, but thinking about there's a program called the National Alliance for Family Caregivers. They provide free respite, and it's not dependent on income. So if that's something that you might want to be interested in, reaching out to the local area agency on aging and independent living, they can connect you to this resource. There's lots of resources out there, but it feels sometimes like a mountain to try to figure it all out. So there are specialists to help you do that. With that, I'm going to say a huge thank you for your time and attention. And I'm going to see if I can stop sharing so we can open it up for question and answer.